My mother's muddled brain. Can you come over? I'm scared. My mother's voice comes through the cold receiver. In a moment, my mother pulls up in her tan sedan, trying to make no noise. I flop onto the cushiony seat. It may be a while till her brain loosens and lets me tag in. Trees, shrubs, and houses are just a blur as they rush past us. What they are doing is wrong. I know what they are doing. They know I know too. She states like a savior with a shield to save the world. Her war is inside her mind, and with luck, I will never meet those same warriors. I brush her hair behind her ear to give me something to do. I ask her, what am I thinking? When she doesn't answer, I tell her pink elephants that fly. She laughs at my silliness and lets me lean close. She has the gift to read the minds of the millions trying to deceive, and yet can barely reach the ring I toss to save her muddled brain. I quickly babble about the bubbles that we made in chemistry class, releasing the pressure to appease the monster that has a hold of my mother's mind. I lean into my mother while always holding my raft to my side. My reality always included someone who heard voices in their head. It wasn't just an idea in a book or a movie. Voices of the mind affected my life on a daily basis. Voices of the mind affected my mother on a daily basis. The voices caused particular havoc when my mother wasn't taking her medication. We could always tell when she wasn't on her medication. When I asked to cross the street to attend vacation Bible school and my mother cussed at me, I knew she wasn't on her medication. When my mother had my grandmother drive around looking for Jesus's airplane, we knew she wasn't on her medication. When she had a certain look in her eye and tone in her voice, we knew she wasn't on her medication. My mother wasn't just a schizophrenic. I believe that when people are considered to be their conditions or states or illnesses, people become less than human. They seem to be only as their situation or condition. They become their labels to themselves and to the world. We run into the danger of becoming our labels when we allow the world to classify us by our very best or our very worst. Our inherent worth depends that we each are more than a label and that we need to retain human value. My mother was a woman with schizophrenia. She was a person first. Though in my world, she was mom. She was Sharon, a woman who loved the color navy blue, vanilla Cokes, and Esprit clothing. She had a talent of knowing the right places to purchase unique gifts. She knew to shop at the Wakarusa dime store for jumbo jelly beans at Easter. She always knew the very present that us kids wanted at Christmas. She was generous and giving. She had a light laughter that reached her deep spirit. She loved midnight drives. It took me a while to realize that not all mothers have schizophrenia. We know our experiences as normal. When I was 28, I was working the Madison Center Day Treatment in Elkhart as a lead teacher. A coworker said, "It would be so difficult to grow up with a schizophrenic mother." My head went up. My mother was schizophrenic. He went on, "Well, it would be difficult if she wasn't successful with medication." My mother wasn't successful with medication. You mean not all mothers hear voices? Children grow up to believe that their reality is everyone's reality, and sometimes they need to directly hear that not all experiences are the same. Cognitively, I knew that not all mothers were schizophrenic, but I didn't understand just how different my childhood was until my coworker stated the difficulty when faced with a parent who was schizophrenic. And it was difficult. I never quite knew what would happen at home. My mother's world was scary. It was filled with delusions, conspiracies, and the very ugliest realities of humankind. My mother verbally processed each of her thoughts of paranoia, and her loved ones heard about her concerns. My siblings used humor to diffuse situations. Because I was the youngest, I was often shipped away for the summers to limit my exposure. I was the shielded one. A few years ago, I realized that I could have been one of the statistics of a murder by a mother. When my mother wasn't on her medication, she believed that the world would come to an end, and she wanted to end our time on earth so we wouldn't be tortured. I could have been one of those stories on the news. She could have succumbed to the voices of her head. Thankfully, my father thought a treatment program was best for her when her discussions turned to the end of the world. I wouldn't have wished that my mother to have schizophrenia, because I know that as difficult as my life was, the torment in my mother's mind and soul was 100 times worse. But I don't remember wishing my mother to be any different either. My experience with my mother taught me to be comfortable with people in various situations. When I worked at a group home, I could tune out the sound of a man with autism. Most people found his loud, repetitive noises very frustrating, but I knew that this man was someone else's loved one. I could sit with a woman who was schizophrenic and listen to her tortured spirit because I knew that the woman could have been my mother. My childhood made me sensitive to labels and language. I have never found jokes at the expense of the group of people to be funny. I take language very serious because the other is real. In my childhood, the other was my mother. Jokes and terms about being crazy or mental hit too close to home for me. Unfortunately, there are still jokes that can be offensive and hurtful. I shudder at us and them talk. Having a mother with schizophrenia taught me flexibility. When faced with providing a service in a church without heat, I am equipped to remain calm and think quickly. I try to be flexible about life's unexpected changes, and I have often initiated changes for a more peaceful situation. I'm willing to take risks. My mother was an incredible example of love. She believed that we could do anything. If we danced for her, of course, we could be the next talent in show business. If we wrestled, of course, we could make the varsity team. If we sang, of course, we could be heard on every radio station. My mother generously gave of her heart. I know without a doubt I was one of her favorite things. I was a beloved child. I hope that my sons feel an ounce of the love that I felt from my mother. But I wasn't always so loving and kind to her. I am sad to admit that it was easy to take advantage of another person's difficulties. It was easy to boss my mother. It was easy to focus on my desires. Most of the time, I was more of a mother to my mother than I was a daughter. When I was young, my mother would bribe me to stay home from school. She was so lonely and scared. She would offer to buy me a Happy Meal or purchase a toy from Kmart if I would only stay home with her. My absences from school hurt my learning, and I almost failed first grade because I couldn't read. I remember having to tell my mother, "I'm going to school today," articulating a firm boundary when my mother also went into overdrive of being focused on stating commands to her. My friend gave me a precious gift of observation when I was 15. My friend told me that I wasn't very nice to my mother. I was defensive at first. What do you mean I'm not nice to my mother inside my head? And then realized that my friend was correct. So I changed my behavior, and I had a wonderful year with my mother. I learned to give my mother the grace of being human and having her own joys and struggles. I realized that I could either add to her pain or I could present joy. I was 16 when she died unexpectedly of a heart attack. What a gift that year was for me. So what do we do if we have a loved one who needs mental health assistance? What can we do if we need mental health assistance? And what can we do if we know someone else whose loved one needs mental assistance? I believe that we need to first recognize that help isn't a 4-letter dirty word. It is okay to need help for ourselves or our loved ones. When I was a lead teacher at Madison Center Day Treatment in Elkhart, I saw all these wonderfully put together therapists, and I knew that they attended therapy. I realized that even though some may look like they have it all together, they need assistance just like everyone. The strong know when they are weak and seek support. The stigma of therapy and medications seems to have decreased, but there can be embarrassment about attending therapy or taking medication. I think embarrassment can stem from keeping mental health a hushed topic. My father was wise to allow us children to speak truth about our home situation. I was free to tell anyone about my mother. I didn't ever feel shame about her condition. So when someone tells me that they take happy pills, as some call them, or anxiety, antidepressant, antipsychotic, or any type of medication, I cheer for the people for being strong and seeking support to make their life more enjoyable and pleasant, when in turn makes life more pleasant for all those who are around them. I shudder at the realistic situation for people in treatment centers depicted in the movie and the book One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. My mother often stopped taking her medication because she didn't like the side effects of the medication. Medication and treatments have come a long way in my lifetime, but there is still room for improvement. Money and resources are needed for research so treatment options can improve. My father was wise to seek education. He read books, attended workshops, and invested in family therapy. He wanted to know how the family could help my mother. Sometimes loved ones can be a key for successful treatment. Sometimes, but not all the time. It is important to be educated about your own treatment and options, though. There can be strategies in the spiritual, social, emotional, physical, and intellectual realm that isn't discussed by physicians. Endorphins, the body's natural feel-good chemicals, can boost happiness, which increases a healthy mental state. Participating in pleasant conversation with friends, eating chocolate or hot peppers, exercising, and physical intimacies are different activities that cause the brain to release endorphins. Medications and mindfulness practices can decrease some effects of depression and anxiety. They can also be utilized for supporting mental health. Support groups can keep us from feeling so isolated or being isolated. People can provide inspiration with example of how they persevered and learned to thrive and what their strategies were. It is important to tell our stories, to know we are not alone, to understand what others are going through, and for them to know that they can possibly be understood. To understand what the loved ones who love us think of us and let go of the standards set by society. The very experiences, emotions, and thoughts that are difficult to speak are the most important ones. Thank you for allowing me to share one of my favorite things, my mother, and being my mother's daughter.